biblical prophecies that came true. What if the Bible didn't just tell stories, but predicted history itself? From the fall of ancient empires to the survival of a nation against all odds, the pages of Scripture contain prophecies written centuries before they came true. Were these divine revelations, or just a coincidence? Today, we uncover the biblical prophecies that shook history and still echo in our world today. Stay tuned, because once you hear them, you'll never look at the Bible the same way again. Have you ever wondered what separates genuine prophecy from mere guesswork? What makes a prediction so precise, so impossible to fabricate, that it defies every rational explanation? Tonight, we're diving into something that has left historians, archaeologists, and skeptics completely speechless. We're talking about biblical prophecies that didn't just come true, they came true with such stunning accuracy that they challenge everything we think we know about the nature of time, knowledge, and divine intervention. What I'm about to show you isn't just another collection of vague predictions that could apply to any era or event. These are specific, detailed declarations made thousands of years ago that have been fulfilled with mathematical precision. We're talking about prophecies that named rulers before they were born, predicted the exact methods of conquest for ancient empires, and foretold the fate of entire civilizations down to the smallest detail. But here's what makes this investigation so compelling. These weren't prophecies made by obscure mystics or forgotten fortune-tellers. They were recorded in one of the most scrutinized documents in human history, a book that has been analyzed, criticized, and challenged by the greatest minds of every generation. Yet, despite centuries of skeptical examination, the accuracy of these predictions remains undeniable. Picture this scenario. You're holding a document written over 2,500 years ago. Within its pages, you find detailed descriptions of events that wouldn't unfold for centuries, military strategies that hadn't been invented, political alliances that seemed impossible, the rise and fall of empires that didn't even exist when the words were written. This isn't science fiction or fantasy literature. These are historical records that have been validated by archaeological discoveries and confirmed by secular historians. The implications are staggering. If these prophecies were genuinely written before the events they describe, then we're looking at evidence of knowledge that transcends normal human understanding. We're confronting the possibility that the future has been known and recorded long before it became the past. Consider the mathematical impossibility of what we're examining. The probability of accurately predicting just one specific historical event centuries in advance approaches zero. But we're not dealing with single predictions. We're looking at chains of interconnected prophecies, each one building upon the last, creating a tapestry of fulfilled predictions that spans millennia. Tonight, we're going to walk through the most undeniable examples of biblical prophecy fulfillment. We'll examine the evidence with the scrutiny of a detective investigating a crime scene. We'll look at archaeological discoveries that have validated ancient predictions. We'll explore historical records that confirm details that seemed impossible when they were first written. But I need to warn you about something. What you're about to discover will challenge your understanding of how the world actually works. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, whether you approach this from a religious or purely historical perspective, the evidence we're about to examine demands an explanation. And the explanations available are far more extraordinary than you might expect. Let's begin with one of the most stunning examples of prophetic accuracy in recorded history: the prophecy of Cyrus the Great. In the book of Isaiah, written approximately 700 years before Christ, we find something that should be impossible. The prophet names a specific ruler who wouldn't be born for another century and describes exactly what this ruler would accomplish. Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1 declares, "This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him." The text goes on to describe how this king would conquer Babylon, how the gates of the city would be opened before him, and how he would decree the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the return of exiled peoples to their homeland. When this prophecy was written, Babylon was the dominant superpower of the ancient world. The idea that it could be conquered seemed impossible. The city was protected by walls so massive they were considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. Yet the prophecy doesn't just predict Babylon's fall. It names the conqueror and describes the method of conquest with startling precision. Fast forward to 539 BC. A Persian king named Cyrus the Great stands at the gates of Babylon. But here's where the prophecy becomes truly extraordinary. Cyrus doesn't lay siege to the city. He doesn't break down the walls with battering rams or siege engines. Instead, his engineers divert the Euphrates River, lowering the water level enough for his soldiers to march under the city's defenses through the riverbed. The prophecy had specifically mentioned that gates would be opened before Cyrus. Historical records confirm that on the night of the conquest, the inner gates of Babylon were mysteriously left unlocked. The city fell without a battle, exactly as the ancient text had predicted. But the fulfillment doesn't end there. Cyrus issued a decree allowing exiled peoples to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. The Cyrus Cylinder, discovered by archaeologists and now housed in the British Museum, contains this exact decree. It validates every detail of the prophetic prediction made centuries earlier. The precision is breathtaking. Not only was the conqueror named before his birth, but the method of conquest, the peaceful nature of the takeover, and the subsequent policies of the victorious king were all accurately predicted. The mathematical probability of such accuracy occurring by chance is essentially zero. Yet this is just the beginning. Let's examine another prophecy that has left historians struggling to explain its accuracy. The prediction concerning the fate of Tyre, one of the ancient world's most powerful maritime cities. The prophet Ezekiel, writing around 600 years before Christ, made a series of specific predictions about Tyre's destruction. He declared that many nations would come against the city like waves of the sea. He predicted that the city's walls would be broken down, its towers destroyed, and its very dust scraped away. Most remarkably, he prophesied that the city would become a place where fishermen would spread their nets, and that it would never be rebuilt. When this prophecy was written, Tyre appeared invincible. The city was built on an island fortress half a mile from shore, protected by walls over 150 feet high. Its navy dominated Mediterranean trade routes. The idea that such a powerful city could be completely destroyed seemed impossible. The fulfillment began with Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who besieged the mainland portion of Tyre for 13 years. When the city finally fell, many of its inhabitants had already fled to the island fortress, taking much of their wealth with them. The prophecy of many nations attacking like waves had begun, but the most dramatic fulfillment was yet to come. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great arrived at Tyre during his conquest of the Persian Empire. The island city refused to surrender, believing its position made it impregnable. What Alexander did next was considered impossible by military standards of the time. He ordered his engineers to build a causeway from the mainland to the island fortress. Here's where the prophecy becomes truly remarkable. To build this causeway, Alexander's forces used the rubble from the destroyed mainland city. They scraped away the very dust and debris, casting it into the sea to create a path to the island. The ancient prediction that the city's dust would be scraped away was being fulfilled literally before the eyes of witnesses. The siege lasted 7 months. When Tyre finally fell, Alexander's revenge was swift and brutal. The city was utterly destroyed, its population killed or enslaved. But the fulfillment of the prophecy extended beyond the immediate conquest. Today, the ancient site of Tyre is exactly what Ezekiel predicted it would become. Fishermen spread their nets where once stood one of the world's greatest cities. Despite numerous attempts throughout history to rebuild a major city on the site, none have succeeded in restoring Tyre to its former glory. The prophecy that it would never be rebuilt has held true for over 2,000 years. The archaeological evidence supports every detail of the prophetic prediction. Excavations have revealed the massive destruction layers corresponding to both Babylonian and Greek conquests. The causeway built by Alexander still exists, now widened by centuries of sedimentation. Ancient Tyre has indeed become a place where fishermen cast their nets, exactly as foretold. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of biblical prophecy fulfillment involves not the destruction of cities, but the preservation of a people who should have vanished from history long ago. The survival of Israel represents one of the most statistically impossible events in human history. Throughout the ancient world, conquered peoples were typically absorbed into the cultures of their conquerors within a few generations. The Assyrian Empire perfected a policy of forced relocation and cultural assimilation that effectively erased the distinct identities of conquered nations. Babylon continued this practice. By all historical precedent, the people of Israel should have disappeared into the melting pot of ancient civilizations. Yet the Hebrew prophets made a startling prediction. They declared that despite facing conquest, exile, and dispersion across the world, their people would remain distinct and would eventually return to their ancestral homeland. This prophecy seemed to defy every principle of historical development and cultural evolution. The fulfillment of this prediction required a series of events so unlikely that their occurrence challenges our understanding of historical causation. First, the people had to maintain their distinct identity despite centuries of persecution and dispersion. Second, they had to retain their connection to a specific geographical location despite being scattered across multiple continents. Third, they had to somehow regain political control over that territory after nearly 2 millennia of foreign rule. Each of these requirements seemed impossible, yet each one was fulfilled in ways that the ancient prophets had specifically described. The preservation of Jewish identity throughout the diaspora represents a unique phenomenon in human history. No other ancient people has maintained such cultural cohesion across such vast distances and time periods. The prophetic texts had predicted that this preservation would occur through specific mechanisms. The people would be scattered to the ends of the earth, but would maintain their identity through adherence to their law and customs. They would face persecution in foreign lands, but would not be completely destroyed. Eventually, they would return to their homeland from the 4 corners of the earth. The historical fulfillment of these predictions reads like a catalog of impossibilities that somehow became realities. Despite facing the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, medieval pogroms, inquisitions, expulsions, and systematic attempts at extermination, the Jewish people not only survived, but maintained their distinct identity and their connection to the land of Israel. The establishment of modern Israel in 1948 represents the culmination of prophecies made over 2,500 years earlier. The return of a scattered people to their ancestral homeland after such an extended period has no parallel in human history. The statistical probability of such an occurrence happening naturally approaches 0, but the fulfillment extends beyond mere survival and return. The prophetic texts had predicted that the restored land would bloom like a garden, that deserts would become fertile, and that the population would multiply beyond counting. Modern Israel's transformation from barren wasteland to agricultural powerhouse validates these ancient predictions with startling accuracy. The evidence we're examining challenges every conventional explanation for prophetic accuracy. These weren't vague predictions that could be interpreted multiple ways. They were specific, detailed declarations that have been fulfilled with mathematical precision across millennia. The precision becomes even more astounding when we examine the prophecy of Daniel concerning the rise and fall of world empires. Written during the Babylonian captivity around 600 years before Christ, Daniel's visions outlined a sequence of global powers that would dominate the ancient world in precise chronological order. But here's what makes Daniel's prophecy absolutely extraordinary. He didn't just predict that empires would rise and fall. He described their specific characteristics, their methods of conquest, their internal structure, and even the manner of their eventual collapse. This wasn't general fortune-telling. This was a detailed roadmap of future history written centuries before the events unfolded. The vision begins with Babylon, represented as a head of gold. Daniel describes this empire's absolute authority and unrivaled wealth, characteristics that perfectly matched Babylon's historical dominance. But the prophecy doesn't stop there. It predicts that Babylon would be conquered by a kingdom of silver, inferior in some ways but more extensive in scope. History records that the Medo-Persian Empire, represented by the silver chest and arms in Daniel's vision, conquered Babylon in 539 BC exactly as predicted. The dual nature of this empire, represented by two arms of silver, reflected the partnership between Media and Persia, with Persia eventually dominating the alliance. The prophecy continues with stunning accuracy. Daniel describes a third kingdom of bronze that would rule over the whole earth. This prediction found its fulfillment in Alexander the Great's Greek Empire, which conquered the known world with unprecedented speed. The bronze represents the Greek military superiority in weapons and tactics that made their rapid conquest possible. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Daniel's prophecy involves the fourth kingdom, described as iron that breaks and crushes everything. This kingdom would be different from all the others, characterized by its brutal efficiency and administrative organization. History confirms that the Roman Empire, with its iron discipline and systematic approach to conquest and governance, perfectly fulfilled this prophetic description. The mathematical probability of accurately predicting the sequence, characteristics, and time frames of 4 successive world empires centuries in advance defies rational calculation. Yet Daniel's prophecy goes even further, describing the eventual fragmentation of the Roman Empire into smaller kingdoms, represented by feet of iron mixed with clay. The historical accuracy is breathtaking. The Western Roman Empire did indeed fragment into the various European kingdoms that emerged during the medieval period. The prophecy's description of iron mixed with clay perfectly captures the attempts to reunite these fragments through intermarriage and alliance, efforts that would prove ultimately unsuccessful, just as iron and clay cannot permanently bond. But let's examine something even more extraordinary. The prophecy of the 70 weeks, also recorded in Daniel, provides what may be the most precise prophetic timeline in ancient literature. This prediction gives the exact time frame for the appearance of the Messiah, calculated from a specific starting point to a specific ending point. The prophecy states that from the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah would be cut off, there would be 69 weeks of years, or 483 years. The starting point is clearly defined as the decree to restore Jerusalem. The ending point is equally specific, the death of the Messiah. Historical records provide the exact date for the starting point. In 458 BC, Artaxerxes of Persia issued a decree allowing Nehemiah to rebuild Jerusalem's walls and restore the city's governance. Using the prophetic year of 360 days, 483 years from this date brings us to 32 AD. The precision is stunning. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified in approximately 32 AD, exactly when the ancient prophecy predicted the Messiah would be cut off. The mathematical accuracy of this timeline, written 5 centuries before its fulfillment, challenges every conventional explanation for prophetic knowledge. Yet this is only the beginning of the messianic prophecies that have been fulfilled with startling precision. The Hebrew Scriptures contain over 300 specific predictions about the coming Messiah, covering everything from his birthplace to the manner of his death. The statistical probability of one person fulfilling all these prophecies by coincidence has been calculated by mathematicians as essentially impossible. Consider just a few of these predictions. The Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, a small town with no apparent significance when the prophecy was written. He would be born of a virgin, a biological impossibility that seemed like pure mythology to ancient readers. He would be betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver, a strangely specific detail that appeared meaningless when first recorded. The prophecy continues with disturbing accuracy. The Messiah would be rejected by his own people, falsely accused, and condemned to death. He would be crucified alongside criminals, yet buried in a rich man's tomb. His clothing would be divided by lot, and his bones would remain unbroken despite the brutal nature of crucifixion. Each of these predictions seemed improbable when written. Collectively, their fulfillment in one individual approaches statistical impossibility. Yet historical records confirm that Jesus of Nazareth fulfilled every one of these ancient prophecies with perfect accuracy. The crucifixion details are particularly remarkable. Crucifixion hadn't been invented when many of these prophecies were written. The Romans wouldn't develop this method of execution until centuries later. Yet Psalm 22, written approximately 1,000 years before Christ, describes the crucifixion experience with medical accuracy that modern physicians find astounding. The psalm describes the victim's bones being out of joint, his heart melting like wax, his strength drying up, and his tongue sticking to his jaws. These symptoms perfectly match the physiological effects of crucifixion as understood by modern medical science. The description of hands and feet being pierced predates the invention of this execution method by centuries. But perhaps most remarkably, the prophecy describes the victim's clothing being divided and lots being cast for his garments. The Gospel of John records that Roman soldiers at Jesus' crucifixion divided his clothing among themselves, but cast lots for his seamless robe, fulfilling this ancient prediction in precise detail. The evidence extends beyond individual prophecies to encompass entire prophetic themes that have unfolded across millennia. The dispersion and regathering of Israel represents one of the most comprehensive prophetic fulfillments in history. Multiple Hebrew prophets predicted that Israel would be scattered to the ends of the earth, but would eventually be regathered to their homeland in the last days. These prophecies seemed impossible when written. How could a nation be destroyed, its people scattered across the world, yet somehow maintain their identity and eventually return to their ancestral land? No such thing had ever happened in human history. Conquered peoples typically assimilated into their host cultures within a few generations, yet the fulfillment of these prophecies has unfolded with stunning accuracy. The Jewish people maintained their distinct identity throughout nearly 2 millennia of diaspora. They preserved their language, their customs, their religious practices, and most importantly, their connection to the land of Israel. This preservation defies every principle of cultural anthropology and historical development. The regathering began exactly as the prophets had predicted. From the 4 corners of the earth, Jewish people began returning to Palestine in increasing numbers throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The establishment of Israel in 1948 represented the culmination of prophecies made over 2,500 years earlier. But the fulfillment extends beyond mere political restoration. The prophetic texts had predicted that the restored land would bloom like a rose, that deserts would become gardens, and that the desolate places would be rebuilt. Modern Israel's transformation from barren wasteland to agricultural powerhouse validates these predictions with remarkable precision. The prophet Isaiah declared that Israel would bud and blossom and fill the face of the world with fruit. Today, Israeli agricultural technology feeds nations around the globe. Crops grown in former desert regions are exported worldwide. The literal fulfillment of this ancient prediction continues to unfold before our eyes. Even more specific predictions have found their fulfillment in modern times. Ezekiel prophesied that Israel would be restored in the latter days from many nations and peoples. The modern state of Israel represents exactly this kind of restoration. With Jewish immigrants arriving from over 100 different countries, speaking dozens of languages yet somehow forming a cohesive nation, the prophecy declared that this restoration would happen in a single day. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared independence and was immediately recognized by the United States and Soviet Union. The prophetic prediction of instantaneous nationhood was fulfilled literally, witnessed by the entire world through modern communications. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of these fulfillments involves their continuing nature. Many biblical prophecies are not merely historical events, but ongoing processes that validate their accuracy with each passing year. The survival and prosperity of Israel in the midst of hostile neighbors, the return of Hebrew as a spoken language, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, all represent continuing fulfillments of ancient predictions. The evidence we're examining transcends religious belief or skeptical doubt. These are documented historical events that have unfolded exactly as ancient texts predicted they would. The mathematical probability of such accuracy occurring by chance has been calculated by statisticians as approaching zero. We're confronting evidence that challenges our fundamental understanding of time, knowledge, and causation. What makes this investigation so compelling is not just the accuracy of individual prophecies, but the interconnected nature of prophetic fulfillment. These weren't isolated predictions made by different people at different times. They form a coherent narrative that spans millennia, each fulfillment building upon the last, creating a tapestry of validated prophecy that defies conventional explanation. The implications force us to confront possibilities that most people prefer to avoid. If these prophecies were genuinely written before the events they describe, then we're looking at evidence of knowledge that transcends normal human understanding. We're confronting the possibility that the future has been known and recorded long before it became the past. The investigation continues as we prepare to examine even more startling examples of prophetic fulfillment that challenge everything we thought we knew about the nature of time and divine intervention in human affairs. The threads of prophetic fulfillment weave together in ways that become increasingly impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. As we dig deeper into these ancient predictions, we encounter something that has left even the most hardened skeptics searching for explanations they cannot find. We're about to examine prophecies so specific, so detailed, and so impossibly accurate that they've forced historians to question their most fundamental assumptions about how knowledge of future events could have been obtained. Let's turn our attention to one of the most chilling prophecies ever recorded, a prediction that seemed so outrageous when it was written that many scholars assumed it must have been composed after the events it describes. The prophecy concerns the destruction of Jerusalem and the exact manner in which it would unfold. In the Gospel of Luke, recorded decades before the events took place, Jesus makes a series of startlingly specific predictions about Jerusalem's fate. He declares that the city will be surrounded by armies, that its inhabitants will fall by the sword, that they will be taken captive to all nations, and that Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. But here's what makes this prophecy absolutely extraordinary. Jesus doesn't just predict that Jerusalem will be destroyed. He describes the specific method of destruction with military precision that wouldn't be understood until the siege actually began. He warns that when the inhabitants see the city surrounded by armies, they should flee to the mountains. He predicts that not one stone of the temple will be left standing upon another. The fulfillment began in 70 AD when Roman legions under Titus surrounded Jerusalem. But the accuracy of the prophetic details becomes truly remarkable when we examine the historical accounts written by Josephus, an eyewitness to the siege. His descriptions read like a commentary on the ancient prophecy, validating every specific detail with disturbing precision. The siege lasted exactly as long as prophetic calculations had suggested. The suffering within the city reached levels that ancient writers struggled to describe. Mothers turned to cannibalism to survive. The temple was destroyed with such thoroughness that, as predicted, not one stone was left standing upon another. The Romans literally scraped the foundation bare, searching for gold that had melted and run between the stones during the fire. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this prophetic fulfillment involves the warning about fleeing to the mountains. Historical records confirm that Christians in Jerusalem, remembering the prophetic warning, fled the city when they saw it being surrounded by armies. When the Roman siege briefly lifted, allowing some inhabitants to escape, the Christian community departed for the mountains of Pella, exactly as the prophecy had instructed. This decision saved their lives. When the siege resumed, it became total and devastating. Those who remained in the city faced starvation, disease, and ultimately death or slavery. The Christians who heeded the prophetic warning survived because they acted on knowledge that had been given to them decades in advance. The mathematical precision extends beyond the immediate destruction to encompass the long-term consequences. The prophecy had declared that Jews would be taken captive to all nations and that Jerusalem would be trampled by Gentiles for a specific period. Both predictions have been fulfilled with stunning accuracy across nearly 2 millennia. Jewish captives from the siege were indeed scattered to all nations of the Roman Empire and beyond. This began the Great Diaspora that would last until the 20th century. Meanwhile, Jerusalem was trampled by a succession of Gentile powers: Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Ottomans, and British, exactly as the ancient prediction had declared. The prophecy's reference to the times of the Gentiles suggested that this trampling would have a specific duration, that there would come a time when Gentile dominion over Jerusalem would end. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israeli forces captured the old city of Jerusalem for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. The times of the Gentiles, as prophetically defined, had reached their conclusion. But let's examine something even more extraordinary. Hidden within the prophetic literature are predictions about technological and social developments that wouldn't occur for millennia. These ancient texts describe scenarios that seemed completely impossible when they were written, but have become startling realities in our modern world. The book of Revelation, written in the 1st century AD, contains descriptions of future events that include details that make no sense from an ancient perspective but are perfectly understandable to modern readers. The text describes a time when the whole world would be able to observe specific events simultaneously, when global communication would be instantaneous, when economic systems would be interconnected across all nations. When John wrote about the whole world watching the bodies of 2 witnesses lying in the streets of Jerusalem, ancient readers must have wondered how such a thing could be possible. How could people in distant lands simultaneously observe events occurring in a specific location? The technology didn't exist. The concept was incomprehensible. Yet today, we live in exactly the kind of world that these ancient prophecies described. Global satellite communications, internet streaming, and 24-hour news cycles make it possible for the entire world to watch events unfold in real time. The prophetic descriptions that seemed impossible for 18 centuries now read like accurate descriptions of our current technological capabilities. The economic prophecies are equally remarkable. Revelation describes a future global economic system where no one could buy or sell without a specific mark or number. To ancient readers, this seemed like fantasy. How could economic activity be controlled with such precision across vast geographical areas? The administrative infrastructure simply didn't exist. Today, we're witnessing the emergence of exactly the kind of economic control systems that these prophecies described. Digital currencies, biometric identification, social credit systems, and cashless transactions are creating the technological foundation for the level of economic control that ancient texts predicted would exist in the last days. The prophecy describes people being unable to buy or sell without the mark of the beast, interpreted by many as some form of identification system that would be required for all economic activity. Current developments in digital identification, vaccine passports, and social credit scoring systems demonstrate how rapidly such comprehensive economic control could be implemented. But here's what makes these technological prophecies truly extraordinary. They weren't written by people who understood modern technology and tried to predict its development. They were written by individuals living in pre-industrial societies who described technologies that wouldn't be invented for nearly 2,000 years. The accuracy of their descriptions challenges every conventional explanation for prophetic knowledge. Consider the prophetic descriptions of warfare in the last days. Ancient texts describe weapons that could kill a third of mankind, wars that would be fought with fire and brimstone from the sky, and conflicts where armies could be numbered in the hundreds of millions. To readers in the first century, these descriptions must have seemed like pure fantasy. The largest armies of the ancient world numbered in the tens of thousands. The idea of armies containing hundreds of millions of soldiers was incomprehensible. Weapons that could kill a third of mankind didn't exist. Fire and brimstone falling from the sky belonged to divine judgment, not human warfare. Yet today, we possess exactly the kinds of weapons that these ancient prophecies described. Nuclear weapons could indeed kill a third of mankind. Modern air warfare does involve fire falling from the sky. China claims the ability to field armies numbering 200 million soldiers, exactly matching the prophetic descriptions that seemed impossible when they were written. The precision extends to details that become increasingly specific as we approach our current era. The prophecy of Daniel describes a time when knowledge would increase rapidly, and people would travel back and forth across the earth with unprecedented speed. These predictions, written 2,500 years ago, perfectly describe the technological explosion of the modern era. When Daniel wrote about knowledge increasing, the sum total of human knowledge doubled perhaps every few centuries. Today, human knowledge doubles every 12 to 18 months in some fields. The exponential growth curve that we're experiencing matches exactly what the ancient prophecy predicted would occur in the last days. The prediction about people traveling back and forth across the earth with great speed seemed meaningless for most of human history. Until the 19th century, people traveled at roughly the same speeds as their ancient ancestors. Horses, sailing ships, and human feet provided the primary means of transportation for millennia. Yet within the past century, we've witnessed exactly the kind of rapid transportation that Daniel's prophecy described. Commercial aviation allows people to travel to any location on Earth within hours. The back-and-forth movement across the globe that Daniel envisioned has become routine for millions of people. But perhaps the most remarkable prophetic fulfillment involves the prediction of Israel's miraculous restoration as a nation. Multiple Old Testament prophets declared that despite being scattered to all nations, the Jewish people would maintain their identity and would eventually return to establish their homeland in the last days. This prophecy seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. Throughout human history, displaced peoples had always assimilated into their host cultures within a few generations. The idea that a people could maintain their distinct identity across millennia of dispersion defied every principle of cultural anthropology. Yet the fulfillment of this prophecy has unfolded exactly as the ancient texts predicted. The Jewish people did maintain their identity throughout nearly 2,000 years of diaspora. They did return from all nations to reestablish Israel. The restoration did occur in the manner and time frame that prophetic calculations had indicated. The prophet Ezekiel had described this restoration using the metaphor of dry bones coming back to life. He envisioned a valley filled with scattered lifeless bones that would somehow be reassembled, covered with flesh, and restored to life. For centuries, this seemed like pure allegory, a spiritual metaphor with no literal application. The Holocaust created exactly the kind of valley of dry bones that Ezekiel had envisioned. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, their remains scattered across Europe like bones in a valley of death. The Jewish people faced what appeared to be their final extinction as a distinct people. Yet from this valley of death came the miraculous restoration that Ezekiel had prophesied. The survivors of the Holocaust became the foundation for the reestablishment of Israel. The nation that had been dead for nearly 2,000 years came back to life, exactly as the ancient prophet had predicted. The timing of this restoration aligns perfectly with prophetic calculations found throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. Multiple prophetic timelines converge on the 20th century as the period when these restorations would occur. The mathematical precision of these ancient calculations has left scholars struggling to explain how such accuracy could have been achieved. But the prophetic fulfillments extend beyond national restoration to encompass specific details about the character and development of the restored nation. The prophecies had predicted that Israel would become a powerful military force, despite being vastly outnumbered by hostile neighbors. They declared that the desert would bloom like a rose, and that Israel would become an exporter of agricultural products. Modern Israel fulfills these predictions with stunning accuracy. Despite being surrounded by hostile nations with populations hundreds of times larger, Israel has become the dominant military power in the Middle East. Israeli agricultural technology feeds nations around the world. The Negev desert has been transformed into productive farmland, exactly as the ancient prophecies predicted. The prophetic texts had also declared that Hebrew, a dead language for centuries, would be revived and spoken again in the restored homeland. When these prophecies were written, Hebrew was already becoming archaic. By the time of Jesus, it had been replaced by Aramaic and Greek for daily communication. The revival of Hebrew as a spoken language represents one of the most extraordinary linguistic resurrections in human history. No other dead language has ever been successfully restored as the primary language of a nation. Yet this impossibility became reality in 20th century Israel, exactly as ancient prophecies had predicted. Even more specifically, the prophecies had declared that Jerusalem would become a burdensome stone for all nations in the last days. This prediction seemed meaningless for most of history. Jerusalem was a relatively minor city under various foreign empires, hardly significant enough to burden the entire world. Yet today, Jerusalem has become exactly what the ancient prophecy predicted. The status of this city dominates international diplomacy, influences global politics, and remains at the center of the conflicts that involve the world's major powers. The disproportionate attention focused on this relatively small city validates the prophetic prediction with remarkable precision. The evidence forces us to confront possibilities that challenge our fundamental assumptions about the nature of time and knowledge. We're examining predictions made thousands of years ago that have been fulfilled with mathematical precision in our modern era. The statistical probability of such accuracy occurring by chance has been calculated as essentially impossible. These aren't vague predictions that could be interpreted multiple ways. They're specific, detailed declarations that have unfolded exactly as written. The naming of rulers before their birth, the description of military tactics before they were invented, the prediction of technological developments millennia before they occurred, all point toward knowledge that transcends normal human understanding. The implications become even more staggering when we realize that many of these prophecies are still in the process of fulfillment. We're not just examining historical curiosities. We're witnessing the real-time validation of ancient predictions that continue to unfold with startling accuracy in our current world. The convergence of fulfilled prophecies in our era suggests that we may be living through the culmination of prophetic timelines that were established thousands of years ago. The mathematical precision of these ancient calculations has created expectations about future events that are based on demonstrated patterns of prophetic accuracy. As we continue this investigation, we'll explore how these fulfilled prophecies connect to predictions about future events that have yet to unfold. The same texts that accurately predicted the rise and fall of ancient empires, the destruction and restoration of Jerusalem, and the technological developments of our modern era contain detailed descriptions of what lies ahead. The evidence we've assembled demonstrates that human history follows patterns that were known and recorded long before they became reality. We're confronting proof that the future has been written in advance by intelligence that transcends normal human limitations. The question is no longer whether biblical prophecy is accurate. The question is what this accuracy tells us about the nature of reality itself and what it means for our understanding of what's coming next. The patterns we're uncovering extend far beyond isolated predictions into something that challenges our most basic understanding of how history unfolds. What we're about to examine will shake you to your core because it reveals a level of prophetic precision that defies every rational explanation. We're talking about prophecies that didn't just predict major historical events, but described the exact sequence in which they would occur, the specific methods that would be used, and even the cultural and social conditions that would exist when these events unfolded. Consider the prophet Jeremiah's stunning prediction about the 70-year duration of Israel's Babylonian captivity. Writing before the exile even began, Jeremiah declared that the people would serve the king of Babylon for exactly 70 years, after which God would punish Babylon and restore his people to their land. This wasn't a round number chosen for poetic effect. It was a precise mathematical calculation that would be fulfilled to the exact year. The captivity began with Nebuchadnezzar's first deportation in 606 BC. 70 years later, in 536 BC, Cyrus issued his decree allowing the Jews to return and rebuild Jerusalem. The mathematical precision is breathtaking. Not 69 years, not 71 years, but exactly 70 years as the ancient prophet had predicted. But here's where this becomes truly extraordinary. The prophecy wasn't just about duration. Jeremiah described what would happen to the Babylonian Empire itself. He predicted that Babylon would become a desolation, that its cities would become ruins without inhabitants, and that the land would become an everlasting wasteland. When this prophecy was written, Babylon was the most powerful empire on earth, seemingly invincible. The fulfillment began exactly as predicted. After conquering Babylon, subsequent Persian and Greek rulers gradually abandoned the city. By the time of Christ, Babylon had become exactly what Jeremiah had foretold, a desolate wasteland. Today, the ancient site remains largely uninhabited, a testament to prophetic accuracy that spans over 2 millennia. Yet this is merely one thread in a tapestry of fulfilled prophecies that becomes increasingly complex and undeniable. Let's examine the remarkable predictions about Egypt found throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. Multiple prophets declared that Egypt, once the mightiest empire in the ancient world, would never again rule over nations, that it would be the lowliest of kingdoms. When these prophecies were written, Egypt had dominated the ancient world for over 2,000 years. The idea that this great civilization would be permanently reduced to a minor regional power seemed impossible. Egyptian pharaohs commanded vast armies, controlled lucrative trade routes, and built monuments that declared their eternal dominion over lesser peoples. Yet the prophetic prediction has been fulfilled with stunning accuracy. Since the Persian conquest in 525 BC, Egypt has never again been a dominant world power. It has been ruled by Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Turks, and British, but has never regained its position as a ruler of nations. For over 2.5 millennia, Egypt has remained exactly what the prophets predicted, a surviving nation that would never again exercise imperial dominion. The precision extends to details that become increasingly specific. The prophet Isaiah declared that there would come a time when Egyptians would worship the same God as Israel, when an altar to the Lord would be established in the heart of Egypt. This seemed not just unlikely but impossible, given the deep-rooted polytheistic traditions of Egyptian civilization. Yet, in our modern era, Egypt contains one of the world's largest Christian populations. The Coptic Orthodox Church traces its origins to the 1st century AD, establishing exactly the kind of monotheistic worship that Isaiah had predicted would flourish in Egypt. The altar to the Lord that the prophet envisioned has been manifested in thousands of churches throughout the land that once worshipped gods of stone and gold. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these fulfilled prophecies involves predictions about the destruction of specific cities that seemed impossible when they were written. The ancient city of Nineveh provides one of the most startling examples of prophetic precision that has left archaeologists speechless. The prophet Nahum made detailed predictions about Nineveh's destruction that read like a military intelligence briefing written before the battle began. He declared that the city would be destroyed by flood, that its gates would be opened to enemies, that fire would consume its palaces, and that the city would become so utterly desolate that people would eventually lose track of its location. When Nahum wrote these words, Nineveh was the largest city in the world, capital of the mighty Assyrian Empire. Its walls were so massive that 3 chariots could drive abreast along their tops. The city seemed impregnable, protected by both military might and geographical advantages that made conquest appear impossible. The fulfillment began in 612 BC when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes besieged the city. But here's where the prophecy becomes truly remarkable. Historical records confirm that the Tigris River flooded that year, washing away a section of Nineveh's defensive wall. The prophetic prediction that the city would be destroyed by flood was fulfilled literally, creating the breach through which enemy armies poured into the city. The destruction was so complete that within a few centuries, people had forgotten the exact location of the once mighty capital. When Alexander the Great passed through the region, he was unaware that he was walking over the ruins of Nineveh. The city had become so utterly desolate that its very location was lost to history. Exactly as the prophet had predicted, it wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists rediscovered Nineveh's ruins, buried under centuries of accumulated debris. The excavations revealed evidence of massive fire damage throughout the city, validating the prophetic prediction that flames would consume its palaces. Every detail of Nahum's ancient prediction had been fulfilled with disturbing precision. The mathematical impossibility of such accuracy becomes even more staggering when we examine the interconnected nature of these prophecies. They don't exist in isolation but form a coherent narrative that spans millennia, with each fulfillment building upon the last in ways that suggest deliberate orchestration rather than random coincidence. Consider how the prophecy of Babylon's destruction connects to the prediction of Cyrus conquering the city, which links to the prophecy of Israel's return from exile, which relates to the prediction of Jerusalem's rebuilding. These aren't separate events but interconnected fulfillments that required precise timing and specific sequences of historical developments. The prophet Daniel provides perhaps the most mathematically precise example of this interconnected prophetic system. His vision of the 70 weeks doesn't just predict the appearance of the Messiah, but provides a detailed timeline that connects to multiple other prophetic sequences throughout Scripture. The calculation begins with the decree to restore Jerusalem, proceeds through specific periods of years, and culminates in the exact time frame when the Messiah would appear and be cut off. But the prophecy doesn't end there. It continues to describe events that would occur after the Messiah's death, including the destruction of Jerusalem by the people of a coming prince. This prediction, written 5 centuries before Christ, accurately describes the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. The prophecy identifies the destroyers as the people of a future ruler who would make a covenant with many. This has led many scholars to connect Daniel's vision to prophecies about end-times events that involve a leader emerging from the same geographical region as the Romans who destroyed Jerusalem. The precision of these interconnected timelines creates what mathematicians call convergent probability. Individual prophecies might be explained as fortunate guesses, but when multiple prophecies intersect at specific points in history with mathematical precision, the probability of coincidence approaches 0. But let's examine something that will truly challenge everything you thought you knew about prophetic fulfillment. Hidden within the ancient texts are predictions about scientific discoveries that wouldn't be made for thousands of years. These prophecies describe natural phenomena with accuracy that modern science has only recently been able to verify. The book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the Bible, contains descriptions of the Earth's place in space that perfectly match discoveries made by modern astronomy. Job declares that God hangs the earth upon nothing, suspended in space without visible support. This description, written thousands of years before telescopes existed, accurately describes what we now know about the Earth's position in the solar system. When Job was written, ancient cosmologies generally depicted the Earth as resting on pillars, floating on water, or supported by giant animals. The idea that the Earth hangs upon nothing, suspended in empty space, contradicted every ancient understanding of planetary mechanics. Yet this impossible description has been validated by modern astronomical observation. The same text describes the expansion of the heavens, declaring that God stretches out the north over empty space. This description perfectly matches modern cosmology's understanding of universal expansion, a concept that wasn't scientifically established until the 20th century. How could ancient writers accurately describe astronomical phenomena that wouldn't be discovered for millennia? The prophet Isaiah makes similar scientifically accurate statements that seem impossible for his time period. He describes the Earth as a circle suspended in space, refers to the countless number of stars when ancient astronomers could only count a few thousand with the naked eye, and speaks of the heavens being stretched out like a tent. These descriptions align perfectly with modern scientific understanding, but contradict every ancient cosmological model. The Earth's spherical shape wasn't scientifically established until the Renaissance. The vast number of stars wasn't known until telescopic observation revealed billions of celestial bodies invisible to ancient observers. The expansion of space wasn't theorized until Einstein's work in the 20th century. Yet these scientific accuracies pale in comparison to the medical knowledge displayed in ancient biblical texts. The book of Leviticus contains sanitation and quarantine procedures that wouldn't be understood by medical science until the 19th century discovery of germ theory. The text describes specific protocols for dealing with infectious diseases that perfectly match modern understanding of disease transmission. When Moses wrote about quarantine procedures for suspected infections, Medical science believed that diseases were caused by evil spirits or imbalanced bodily humors. The idea that invisible organisms could cause illness and spread through contact wasn't discovered until thousands of years later. Yet the biblical procedures for containing infectious diseases demonstrate sophisticated understanding of principles that modern medicine has only recently validated. The precision extends to surgical and dietary instructions that anticipate medical discoveries by millennia. The biblical requirement for circumcision on the 8th day after birth aligns perfectly with modern understanding of infant blood clotting factors, which reach optimal levels on the 8th day. This timing couldn't have been determined through ancient medical knowledge, but represents perfect understanding of physiological processes. But here's where these scientific prophecies become truly extraordinary. They weren't written as medical or scientific treatises, but as religious and historical documents. The scientific accuracy appears embedded within narratives focused on spiritual and moral instruction. The authors weren't trying to demonstrate scientific knowledge, but were recording information that contained scientific truths they couldn't have understood. This pattern suggests that the source of biblical prophecy had access to knowledge that transcended the limitations of ancient human understanding. The same intelligence that could predict future historical events with mathematical precision could also describe scientific realities that wouldn't be discovered for thousands of years. The implications become even more staggering when we examine prophecies about human behavior and social development that have been fulfilled in our modern era. The Apostle Paul's description of end times characteristics reads like a sociological analysis of contemporary culture, written nearly 2,000 years before these conditions existed. Paul predicted that in the last days, people would be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. This description, written in the 1st century A.D., perfectly captures the moral and social characteristics of our current era. When Paul wrote these words, Roman society operated under strict codes of honor, family loyalty, and civic duty. The individualistic, pleasure-seeking culture he described didn't exist and would have seemed impossible to ancient readers. Yet his prophetic description accurately captures the dominant characteristics of modern Western civilization. The prediction extends beyond general moral decline to specific social phenomena that have emerged in our technological age. Paul describes people as having a form of godliness but denying its power, always learning but never able to come to knowledge of truth. This perfectly describes the superficial spirituality and information overload that characterizes our current era. The prophecy warns of people who accumulate teachers to suit their own desires, turning away from truth to embrace myths. The explosion of alternative spiritualities, conspiracy theories, and customized belief systems in our internet age validates this ancient prediction with disturbing accuracy. People today can indeed find teachers who will confirm any belief they wish to hold, exactly as Paul predicted would happen in the last days. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these behavioral prophecies involves their connection to technological developments that make such behaviors possible on a global scale. The ancient texts describe conditions that required global communication, instant information sharing, and the ability for entire populations to be simultaneously influenced by the same messages. The book of Revelation describes a time when the whole world would wonder after a particular leader, when global economic systems would be controlled by a single authority, when information could be transmitted instantly across vast distances. These scenarios seemed impossible for most of human history, but have become technological realities in our modern era. The convergence of fulfilled prophecies in our time period suggests that we may be witnessing the culmination of prophetic timelines that were established thousands of years ago. The mathematical precision of ancient calculations has created a framework for understanding current events that transcends political analysis or social commentary. We're not just observing random historical developments, but watching the systematic fulfillment of predictions made by intelligence that possessed comprehensive knowledge of human history before it unfolded. The accuracy of past fulfillments creates expectations about future events that are based on demonstrated patterns of prophetic precision. The evidence forces us to confront the possibility that human history follows a predetermined script written by intelligence that operates outside the normal constraints of time and space. We're examining proof that the future was known and recorded long before it became the present, challenging every assumption about free will, causation, and the nature of reality itself. As we continue to witness the real-time fulfillment of ancient prophecies, we're compelled to consider what this accuracy means for predictions about events that have yet to occur. The same texts that accurately predicted the rise and fall of empires, the destruction and restoration of cities, and the technological and social developments of our modern era contain detailed descriptions of future events that would complete the prophetic timeline. The investigation reveals that we're not just studying historical curiosities, but examining a prophetic system that continues to unfold with mathematical precision in our current world. The implications extend far beyond academic interest into questions about the ultimate direction of human civilization and our role in fulfilling ancient predictions that were written specifically for our generation. The mystery deepens as we realize that these fulfilled prophecies may represent only the beginning of revelations that will fundamentally transform our understanding of human destiny and divine intervention in the affairs of nations. What we've uncovered challenges the very foundations of how we interpret history, understand current events, and anticipate what lies ahead in the continuing fulfillment of ancient prophetic declarations. The prophetic accuracy we've been examining reaches its most astounding pinnacle when we encounter predictions that seem to violate the very laws of probability and historical precedent. What I'm about to reveal will challenge every assumption you hold about the relationship between ancient knowledge and modern reality. We're talking about prophecies so impossibly precise that they've forced entire academic institutions to reconsider their fundamental understanding of how information about future events could have been obtained. Let's examine the breathtaking prophecy concerning the fate of Edom, a nation that dominated the ancient trade routes and seemed destined for eternal prosperity. The prophet Obadiah made a series of declarations about Edom that appeared not just unlikely, but completely impossible when they were written. He predicted that this mountain fortress nation would be utterly destroyed, that its wisdom would perish, that its people would be cut off forever, and most remarkably, that the very memory of Edom would be erased from human consciousness. When Obadiah recorded these words, Edom controlled the lucrative spice and incense trade between Arabia and the Mediterranean world. The nation's capital, Petra, was carved directly into solid rock, creating what appeared to be an impregnable fortress city. Edom's strategic position and natural defenses made it seem invincible. The Edomites were renowned throughout the ancient world for their wisdom and commercial expertise. Yet every detail of this impossible prophecy has been fulfilled with surgical precision. The Edomite people have vanished so completely from history that until recent archaeological discoveries, many scholars questioned whether they had ever existed at all. The great city of Petra, once a thriving metropolis, became a lost city buried by sand and forgotten for over a millennium. When European explorers rediscovered it in the 19th century, they found exactly what the prophet had predicted: magnificent ruins with no inhabitants, a testament to a civilization that had been utterly cut off. The mathematical impossibility becomes even more staggering when we examine the specific method of Edom's destruction. Obadiah predicted that the nation would be destroyed by its former allies, that those who ate bread with them would set traps beneath them. Historical records confirm that Edom was indeed conquered by Arab tribes who had previously been their trading partners and military allies. The betrayal came from exactly the source that ancient prophecy had identified. But here's what makes this prophetic fulfillment absolutely extraordinary. The prediction wasn't just about political destruction. Obadiah declared that the house of Esau would become stubble, completely consumed by fire, with no survivors remaining. This seemed like hyperbolic language when it was written. Nations might be conquered, but complete ethnic extinction was virtually unknown in the ancient world. Yet the Edomites have been fulfilled exactly as predicted. They didn't just lose political independence like other conquered peoples. They disappeared entirely as a distinct ethnic group. No modern population can trace its ancestry back to the ancient Edomites. They were literally cut off forever, exactly as the impossible prophecy had declared would happen. The precision extends beyond national destruction to encompass geographical and ecological changes that have unfolded exactly as ancient texts predicted they would. The prophet Isaiah made remarkable declarations about the land of Edom itself, predicting that it would become a wasteland of thorns and nettles, a dwelling place for wild animals, with streams turning to pitch and dust becoming sulfur. Modern visitors to the region that was once Edom find exactly the conditions that Isaiah described. The area has become largely uninhabitable, characterized by unusual geological formations and mineral deposits that create an almost otherworldly landscape. The Dead Sea region, part of ancient Edom's territory, contains exactly the kind of sulfurous, pitch-like substances that the prophet described would characterize the area. The ecological transformation has been so complete that the region now serves as a nature preserve rather than human habitat. Wild animals do indeed inhabit areas where great cities once stood, exactly as the ancient prophecy predicted. The fulfillment has been so literal that it reads like a geological survey written thousands of years in advance. But let's examine something that will truly shake your understanding of prophetic precision. Hidden within the ancient texts are predictions about specific technological developments that wouldn't occur for millennia, described in language that seems impossible for pre-industrial societies, but perfectly matches modern realities. The prophet Zechariah provides one of the most chilling examples of this phenomenon. Writing in the 6th century BC, he describes a plague that would strike people in a future war, causing their flesh to rot while they stand on their feet, their eyes to rot in their sockets, and their tongues to rot in their mouths. This description made no sense to ancient readers. No known disease could cause such rapid tissue destruction while victims remained standing. Yet Zechariah's description perfectly matches the effects of radiation poisoning from nuclear weapons. The rapid cellular breakdown, the specific pattern of tissue destruction, the fact that victims could remain upright while their bodies literally dissolved, all align with medical understanding of acute radiation syndrome. The prophet was describing the effects of weapons that wouldn't be invented for over 2.5 millennia. The same text describes horses, riders, and chariots being struck by the same plague, suggesting that both organic and mechanical systems would be affected simultaneously. This perfectly matches the electromagnetic pulse effects of nuclear detonation, which destroys both biological tissue and electronic systems. Ancient readers couldn't have understood these references, but modern military analysts recognize them immediately. The prophetic descriptions become even more specific when they address the scale and scope of end-times warfare. The book of Revelation describes armies numbering 200 million soldiers, a number that seemed impossible for most of human history. The largest armies of the ancient world numbered in the tens of thousands. The idea of military forces containing hundreds of millions of personnel was beyond comprehension. Yet today, we live in exactly the kind of world where such massive military mobilization is possible. China alone claims the ability to field armies of precisely this size. The demographic and technological infrastructure exists for the first time in human history to support military operations on the scale that ancient prophecies described. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these military prophecies involves their description of weapons and tactics that anticipate modern warfare with stunning accuracy. The ancient texts describe fire coming down from heaven, weapons that kill with smoke and flame, and battles fought in the air above the earth. To readers in biblical times, warfare was conducted with swords, spears, and arrows. The concept of aerial combat was inconceivable. Yet the prophetic descriptions perfectly match modern air warfare, complete with missiles, bombs, and aircraft engaging in combat above ground-based forces. The precision extends to descriptions of how information would be transmitted during these future conflicts. Revelation describes the whole world watching specific events unfold in real time, with global populations simultaneously observing developments in distant locations. This seemed impossible for most of human history when communication was limited to the speed of horses and sailing ships. Today, we take global real-time communication for granted. Satellite television, internet streaming, and social media allow billions of people to simultaneously watch events unfold anywhere on Earth. The technological infrastructure that seemed impossible when these prophecies were written has become so commonplace that we barely notice how precisely it fulfills ancient predictions. The economic prophecies are equally remarkable in their anticipation of modern financial systems. The ancient texts describe a time when all buying and selling would be controlled by a single authority, when economic activity could be monitored and regulated on a global scale, when individuals could be prevented from participating in commerce based on their compliance with specific requirements. When these prophecies were written, economic activity was primarily local and personal. The idea of global economic control seemed impossible. There was no technology for monitoring transactions across vast distances, no infrastructure for implementing universal economic policies. Yet today, we're witnessing the emergence of exactly the kind of comprehensive economic control systems that ancient prophecies described. Digital currencies, biometric identification, social credit systems, and cashless transaction networks are creating the technological foundation for the level of economic oversight that biblical texts predicted would exist in the last days. Central bank digital currencies could provide governments with real-time monitoring of every financial transaction, exactly matching the prophetic descriptions of universal economic control. The convergence of these technological developments with other fulfilled prophecies creates what statisticians call compound probability. When multiple independent predictions intersect at the same historical moment, the likelihood of coincidence diminishes exponentially. We're not just witnessing isolated fulfillments, but systematic validation of interconnected prophetic themes. But here's where this investigation takes its most startling turn. The same texts that accurately predicted technological developments also contain detailed descriptions of social and spiritual conditions that would exist when these technologies emerged. The prophecies don't just describe what would be invented, but how human society would respond to these innovations. The ancient texts predict that despite unprecedented access to information, people would become increasingly deceived and confused. They describe a time when truth would be suppressed, when people would call good evil and evil good, when knowledge would increase but wisdom would decrease. This perfectly describes our current information age, where despite having access to more data than any previous generation, societies seem increasingly divided about basic facts and moral principles. The prophetic prediction that knowledge would increase while understanding diminished has been fulfilled with disturbing accuracy in our digital era. The texts describe people becoming lovers of themselves rather than lovers of truth, pursuing pleasure while avoiding responsibility, accumulating teachers who tell them what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. These behavioral patterns, predicted 2,000 years ago, precisely characterize the dominant cultural trends of our contemporary world. The social media age has created exactly the kind of narcissistic, pleasure-seeking, truth-avoiding culture that ancient prophecies predicted would emerge in the last days. People can now surround themselves with information sources that confirm their existing beliefs while avoiding any challenges to their worldview, exactly as biblical texts predicted would happen. But the prophetic accuracy extends beyond general social trends to encompass specific events and conditions that create the perfect storm for end-times scenarios. The restoration of Israel as a nation, the development of weapons capable of destroying all life, the emergence of global communication and economic systems, the moral and spiritual decline of formerly Christian civilizations, all represent fulfillment of distinct prophetic themes that ancient texts declared would converge in the last days. The mathematical precision of this convergence defies rational explanation. We're not witnessing random historical developments, but systematic fulfillment of a prophetic timeline that was established thousands of years ago. The accuracy of past predictions creates legitimate expectations about future events based on demonstrated patterns of prophetic precision. The ancient texts don't just describe isolated events, but outline comprehensive scenarios that encompass political, military, economic, technological, and spiritual developments. These scenarios are unfolding in our current era with the same mathematical precision that characterized prophecies about ancient empires and historical events. The investigation reveals that we're not just studying religious texts, but examining a prophetic system that continues to demonstrate accuracy in real time. The implications extend far beyond theological debate into questions about the fundamental nature of time, causation, and divine intervention in human affairs. What we've discovered challenges every conventional explanation for prophetic knowledge. The precision of fulfilled predictions suggests access to information that transcends normal human limitations. We're confronting evidence that the future was known and recorded long before it became the present, creating a framework for understanding current events that operates outside conventional historical analysis. The evidence forces us to consider possibilities that most people prefer to avoid. If these prophecies were genuinely written before the events they describe, then we're looking at proof of intelligence that possesses comprehensive knowledge of human history before it unfolds. We're examining evidence of divine intervention in human affairs that operates according to predetermined plans established before the foundation of the world. The mathematical impossibility of such accuracy occurring by chance has been calculated by statisticians as approaching zero. We're not dealing with lucky guesses or clever interpretations after the fact. These are specific, detailed predictions that have been validated by historical events, archaeological discoveries, and contemporary developments that continue to unfold according to ancient prophetic timelines. As we witness the real-time fulfillment of prophecies in our current era, we're compelled to acknowledge that human history follows patterns that were known and recorded thousands of years before they became reality. The same texts that accurately predicted the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, the development of modern technology, and the social conditions of our contemporary world contain detailed descriptions of future events that would complete the prophetic timeline. The investigation has revealed that biblical prophecy represents far more than religious literature or historical documentation. We're examining a comprehensive system of future knowledge that demonstrates accuracy patterns that challenge our fundamental understanding of how information about coming events could have been obtained by ancient writers. The convergence of fulfilled prophecies in our era suggests that we may be living through the culmination of prophetic sequences that were initiated thousands of years ago. The precision of past fulfillments creates a framework for anticipating future developments based on demonstrated prophetic accuracy rather than speculation or wishful thinking. What we've uncovered represents only a fraction of the prophetic evidence available for examination. The patterns we've identified extend throughout biblical literature, creating an interconnected web of predictions that span from the earliest books of the Old Testament through the final chapters of Revelation. Each fulfilled prophecy validates the accuracy of the entire prophetic system, building confidence in predictions that have yet to reach completion. The evidence demands a response that goes beyond academic curiosity or religious debate. We're confronting information that has profound implications for understanding current events, anticipating future developments, and recognizing our role in the continuing fulfillment of ancient prophetic declarations that were written specifically for our generation. The investigation continues as we prepare to examine the most extraordinary prophetic fulfillments that are still unfolding in our contemporary world, validating ancient predictions with mathematical precision that leaves no room for coincidence or skeptical dismissal. The threads of prophetic fulfillment we've been examining lead us to perhaps the most mathematically impossible prediction in all of recorded history. What I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you think you know about the relationship between ancient texts and modern geopolitics. We're talking about a prophecy so specific, so detailed in its description of contemporary events, that it has left political analysts and biblical scholars equally stunned by its precision. Hidden within the book of Ezekiel is a prophecy that seemed completely meaningless for over 2 millennia. The prophet describes a massive military alliance that would emerge in the latter days, naming specific nations and geographical regions that would unite against Israel. When Ezekiel recorded these words 2,600 years ago, most of these nations didn't exist in the forms he described. The geographical boundaries he outlined wouldn't be established for centuries. The political alliances he predicted seemed impossible, given the historical relationships between these regions. Yet today, we're witnessing the emergence of exactly the coalition that Ezekiel described with startling precision. The prophet names Gog of the land of Magog, identified by many scholars as the region that encompasses modern-day Russia. He describes Persia, which corresponds to contemporary Iran. He mentions Ethiopia and Libya, nations that have indeed aligned themselves with the powers Ezekiel identified as Israel's future enemies. But here's what makes this prophecy absolutely extraordinary. Ezekiel doesn't just name the participants in this future conflict. He describes their motivations, their military strategies, and even the specific geographical features that would characterize the battlefield. The prophet declares that this coalition would come down upon Israel like a storm cloud covering the land, seeking to plunder a people gathered from many nations. The precision becomes breathtaking when we examine the current geopolitical landscape. Iran has indeed formed military alliances with Russia, providing exactly the kind of partnership that ancient prophecy described. These nations have established military cooperation agreements, shared weapons technology, and coordinated their Middle Eastern strategies in ways that perfectly match Ezekiel's predictions about their future collaboration. The prophetic description of Israel as a land of unwalled villages seemed impossible when it was written. Ancient cities were defined by their defensive walls. The idea of a prosperous nation existing without fortifications contradicted every principle of ancient urban planning. Yet modern Israel exists exactly as Ezekiel described, with the cities and settlements that have no walls, depending on technology and military superiority rather than physical barriers for protection. Even more remarkably, the prophecy describes Israel as a people gathered from many nations, living securely in a land that had been desolate but was now fruitful and prosperous. This description perfectly matches modern Israel's demographic composition, with Jewish populations having returned from over 100 countries to establish a nation that has indeed transformed desert regions into agricultural abundance. But the prophetic precision extends beyond military alliances to encompass economic motivations that drive contemporary Middle Eastern politics. Ezekiel declares that the invading coalition would come to take spoil and carry away silver and gold, to seize livestock and goods. The prophet specifically mentions that they would target a people who dwell at the center of the earth, a phrase that perfectly describes Israel's geographical position at the intersection of 3 continents. Recent discoveries of massive natural gas and oil reserves in Israeli territorial waters have created exactly the kind of economic incentives that Ezekiel described. These energy resources represent billions of dollars in potential wealth, providing precisely the kind of spoil that would motivate a military coalition seeking to plunder Israel's newfound prosperity. The prophecy becomes even more specific when it describes the reaction of other nations to this invasion. Ezekiel mentions merchants of Tarshish and their young lions, identified by many scholars as maritime trading nations, possibly including Britain and its former colonies. These nations are described as protesting the invasion, but not intervening militarily, asking whether the coalition has come to take spoil and carry away goods. This diplomatic response perfectly matches how Western nations have historically reacted to Middle Eastern conflicts involving Israel. Strong verbal protests, economic sanctions, diplomatic initiatives, but reluctance to engage in direct military confrontation with major powers like Russia and Iran. The prophetic description of their response as questioning rather than fighting aligns remarkably with contemporary patterns of international diplomacy. Yet perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ezekiel's prophecy involves its description of divine intervention in this conflict. The prophet declares that when this coalition comes against Israel, God himself will intervene with supernatural phenomena that will destroy the invading armies. He describes massive earthquakes, fire and brimstone falling from heaven, and confusion that causes the enemies to turn their weapons against each other. The prophetic text provides specific details about this supernatural intervention that seem to anticipate modern weapons of mass destruction. The description of fire devouring the invaders, of their weapons being burned for fuel, of bodies requiring 7 months to bury, all suggest the kind of devastation associated with nuclear warfare or other advanced military technologies. But here's where this prophecy takes an even more startling turn. Ezekiel declares that this divine intervention will be so dramatic that it will be recognized by all nations as supernatural rather than merely military. The entire world will acknowledge that Israel's deliverance came through divine power rather than human strategy or superior weaponry. This global recognition of supernatural intervention represents a complete reversal of the secular worldview that has dominated international politics for centuries. The prophecy suggests that this conflict will force humanity to acknowledge realities that transcend natural explanations, fundamentally altering how people understand the relationship between divine purpose and human events. The mathematical probability of these detailed predictions being fulfilled by coincidence has been calculated by statisticians as essentially 0. We're not dealing with vague prophecies that could be interpreted multiple ways. These are specific declarations about military alliances, economic motivations, geographical locations, and divine interventions that are unfolding exactly as ancient texts declared they would. But the prophetic timeline extends beyond this single conflict to encompass a sequence of events that would reshape global civilization. The same texts that predict the Northern Coalition's invasion of Israel also describe what would happen afterward, outlining scenarios that would fundamentally transform human society and governmental systems. The Book of Daniel provides complementary prophecies that describe the emergence of a global leader who would arise in the aftermath of these Middle Eastern conflicts. This individual is described as possessing unprecedented charisma and political skill, able to solve international crises and establish global peace through diplomatic brilliance that amazes world leaders. The prophetic description of this future ruler reads like a political biography written in advance. He would emerge from the region of the old Roman Empire, gain power through peaceful means rather than military conquest, and establish a 7-year agreement that would bring temporary peace to the Middle East. His rise would coincide with a period of global economic instability and international chaos that would make his solutions seem miraculous. Contemporary developments in global governance, international economics, and Middle Eastern politics are creating exactly the kind of conditions that these prophecies describe as preceding this leader's emergence. Economic interconnectedness makes local financial crises global problems requiring coordinated international solutions. Regional conflicts threaten global stability in ways that demand comprehensive diplomatic interventions. The prophetic texts describe specific technologies and governmental systems that would characterize this leader's administration. Global surveillance capabilities, universal identification systems, and centralized economic control represent exactly the kind of technological infrastructure that exists today, but seemed impossible when these prophecies were written. The precision extends to descriptions of how this leader would use these technologies to control global commerce and individual behavior. The ancient texts describe a system where no one could buy or sell without specific authorization, where economic activity would be monitored and controlled through technological means that perfectly match contemporary developments in digital currencies and biometric identification. But here's what makes these prophecies truly extraordinary. They don't just describe technological capabilities, but predict how human psychology would respond to these systems. The texts declare that people would willingly accept comprehensive surveillance and control in exchange for security and prosperity, trading freedom for convenience in ways that perfectly characterize contemporary social trends. The prophetic accuracy becomes even more remarkable when we examine predictions about spiritual and moral conditions that would exist during this period. The ancient texts describe a time of unprecedented spiritual deception, when people would be unable to distinguish truth from falsehood despite having access to more information than any previous generation. This description perfectly matches our current information age, where despite unprecedented access to data and communication technologies, societies seem increasingly confused about basic facts and fundamental principles. The prophetic prediction that knowledge would increase while wisdom decreased has been fulfilled with disturbing accuracy in our digital era. The texts describe specific forms of deception that would characterize this period, including false signs and wonders that would be so convincing that even spiritually discerning people would be in danger of being deceived. The development of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and sophisticated media manipulation technologies creates exactly the kind of deceptive capabilities that these ancient prophecies warned would emerge. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these end-times prophecies involves their description of how quickly conditions would deteriorate once certain prophetic milestones were reached. The texts describe a period of tribulation so intense that unless it were shortened, no flesh would survive. This suggests global catastrophes of unprecedented magnitude, possibly involving the same weapons of mass destruction that other prophecies describe being used in Middle Eastern conflicts. The mathematical precision of these interconnected prophecies creates what statisticians call cascading probability. When multiple detailed predictions begin fulfilling simultaneously, the likelihood of coincidence diminishes exponentially. We're not witnessing isolated events, but systematic validation of comprehensive prophetic scenarios. The convergence of fulfilled prophecies in our era suggests that we may be approaching the culmination of prophetic timelines that were established thousands of years ago. The same texts that accurately predicted the restoration of Israel, the development of modern technology, and contemporary geopolitical alignments contain detailed descriptions of events that would complete these prophetic sequences. The evidence forces us to confront the possibility that current international developments are following predetermined patterns rather than responding to random political and economic forces. The precision of past prophetic fulfillments creates legitimate expectations about future events based on demonstrated accuracy rather than speculation. What makes this investigation so compelling is not just the accuracy of individual predictions, but their interconnected nature. These prophecies form a coherent narrative that spans millennia, each fulfillment building upon the last in ways that suggest deliberate orchestration rather than fortunate guessing. The implications extend far beyond religious belief into questions about the fundamental nature of human history and international affairs. If these prophecies are accurate, then current events are unfolding according to patterns that were known and recorded long before they became reality. The mathematical impossibility of such precision occurring by chance has been validated by multiple statistical analyses conducted by secular institutions. We're examining evidence that challenges conventional explanations for prophetic knowledge and demands consideration of possibilities that most people prefer to avoid. The investigation reveals that biblical prophecy represents far more than ancient religious literature. We're examining a comprehensive system of future knowledge that continues to demonstrate accuracy in real time, creating frameworks for understanding current events that operate outside conventional political analysis. The convergence of technological development, geopolitical alignment, and social conditions described in ancient prophecies suggests that we may be living through the most significant period of prophetic fulfillment in human history. The precision of these ancient calculations creates expectations about future developments that are based on demonstrated patterns rather than wishful thinking. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these fulfilled prophecies involves their purpose. The ancient texts declare that these events would unfold not as random historical developments, but as deliberate demonstrations of divine sovereignty that would ultimately lead to global recognition of spiritual realities that secular worldviews have rejected. The prophecies suggest that the coming period of global crisis and supernatural intervention will serve as a final test of human willingness to acknowledge divine authority over international affairs. The mathematical precision of prophetic fulfillment represents evidence that transcends cultural, religious, and philosophical boundaries, demanding responses that go beyond academic curiosity. As we continue to witness real-time validation of ancient predictions, we're compelled to acknowledge that human history follows patterns that were established long before they became visible through contemporary events. The same intelligence that accurately predicted the rise and fall of ancient empires continues to demonstrate comprehensive knowledge of future developments through ongoing prophetic fulfillments. The evidence suggests that what we're experiencing represents only the beginning of prophetic revelations that will fundamentally transform human understanding of reality itself. The precision of past fulfillments creates confidence in predictions that have yet to reach completion, establishing frameworks for anticipating future developments that operate according to divine timelines rather than human expectations. The investigation has revealed that we're not just studying historical documents, but examining living prophecies that continue to unfold with mathematical precision in our contemporary world. The implications extend far beyond religious speculation into practical considerations about how individuals and nations should respond to evidence of predetermined historical patterns that challenge every conventional assumption about human autonomy and divine intervention. The patterns we're uncovering force us to confront an even more disturbing reality about the systematic nature of prophetic fulfillment that extends into realms most scholars refuse to acknowledge. What I'm about to reveal will shake you to your core, because it involves prophecies that didn't just predict individual events, but described entire civilizational cycles that have repeated throughout history with mathematical precision that defies every rational explanation. Deep within the prophetic literature lies a series of predictions about the rise and fall of human consciousness itself, describing patterns of spiritual awakening and decline that operate according to precise timelines spanning centuries. These aren't vague references to general moral trends, but detailed descriptions of specific psychological and social phenomena that would characterize different eras of human development. The prophet Daniel describes these cycles using the metaphor of a great tree that grows to enormous height, providing shelter and sustenance for all creatures, only to be cut down when it reaches its peak. But here's what makes this prophecy absolutely extraordinary. The cutting down isn't permanent destruction, but rather a cyclical pruning that allows for new growth according to predetermined seasons. Historical analysis reveals that human civilizations have indeed followed these cyclical patterns with stunning accuracy. The rise of Greece, Rome, medieval Christendom, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and modern technological civilization all demonstrate the same pattern of growth, peak achievement, moral decline, and eventual collapse that the ancient texts described would repeat throughout human history. But the prophetic precision goes far beyond general civilizational cycles to encompass specific details about how these transitions would unfold. The texts describe periods when knowledge would increase rapidly, while wisdom decreased, when communication would become global, while understanding became fragmented, when material prosperity would reach unprecedented levels, while spiritual poverty became epidemic. Every one of these conditions characterizes our current era with disturbing accuracy. We live in a time of exponential knowledge growth coupled with widespread confusion about fundamental truths. Global communication networks coexist with increasing social fragmentation. Material abundance in developed nations coincides with spiritual emptiness that manifests in depression, addiction, and existential despair on unprecedented scales. The ancient prophecies describe these conditions not as random historical developments, but as predictable consequences of humanity's rejection of spiritual principles that govern civilizational stability. The texts declare that when societies abandon divine law in favor of human wisdom, they inevitably follow patterns of decay that lead to judgment and renewal. This cyclical pattern explains why the same moral and social problems repeat throughout history, despite technological advancement and accumulated human experience. Each generation believes it has discovered new solutions to ancient problems, yet finds itself facing the same fundamental challenges that destroyed previous civilizations. The prophetic texts describe this phenomenon with startling psychological insight. They declare that humanity would become increasingly proud of its achievements, while becoming increasingly blind to the spiritual principles that make those achievements possible. This pride would lead to the rejection of divine authority and the embrace of human autonomy that inevitably results in civilizational collapse. Modern secular humanism represents exactly the kind of philosophical worldview that ancient prophecies identified as the precursor to civilizational judgment. The belief that human reason and scientific method can solve all problems without reference to spiritual realities perfectly matches the prophetic description of end-times thinking. But here's where these civilizational prophecies become truly chilling. The ancient texts declare that the final cycle would be different from all previous ones. Instead of localized civilizational collapse, followed by renewal in different geographical regions, the final judgment would be global in scope. encompassing all nations simultaneously. This global scope becomes possible only in our modern era of international economic interdependence, global communication networks, and weapons capable of worldwide destruction. Previous civilizational collapses were limited by geographical and technological constraints that no longer exist. For the first time in human history, the infrastructure exists for truly global civilizational collapse exactly as ancient prophecies predicted. The texts describe specific triggers for this final judgment that align perfectly with contemporary global challenges. Environmental destruction, moral corruption, economic inequality, technological hubris, and spiritual apostasy are all identified as conditions that would characterize the final generation before divine intervention restored divine order to human affairs. Each of these conditions exists today on scales unprecedented in human history. Environmental degradation threatens global ecosystems. Moral relativism has replaced absolute standards in most developed nations. Economic systems create vast disparities between rich and poor. Technological capabilities exceed human wisdom to control them safely. Spiritual apostasy characterizes formerly Christian civilizations. The convergence of all these prophetic markers in our current era suggests that we may be living through the final civilizational cycle that ancient texts identified as the climax of human history. The mathematical precision of these convergences defies coincidental explanation and demands serious consideration of prophetic accuracy. But the most remarkable aspect of these civilizational prophecies involves their description of what would happen after the final judgment. The texts don't describe permanent destruction, but rather transformation into forms of human society that transcend all previous civilizational achievements. They speak of a golden age characterized by universal peace, environmental restoration, economic justice, and spiritual enlightenment. This promised renewal wouldn't result from human effort or technological advancement, but from divine intervention that would establish governmental and social systems based on spiritual principles rather than human wisdom. The prophecies describe this intervention as sudden, supernatural, and undeniable, forcing all humanity to acknowledge realities they had previously rejected. The precision of past prophetic fulfillments creates legitimate expectations that these promises of civilizational renewal will be fulfilled with the same accuracy that characterized predictions about ancient empires and modern technological developments. The same intelligence that accurately predicted historical events continues to demonstrate comprehensive knowledge of future developments. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary discovery in our investigation involves prophecies that seem to describe individual human experiences during these periods of civilizational transition. The ancient texts contain detailed descriptions of how people would think, feel, and behave during the final generation before divine intervention restored spiritual order to human affairs. These psychological prophecies demonstrate the same mathematical precision that characterizes predictions about political and social events. They describe specific mental and emotional states that would characterize different groups of people during the period of final judgment and subsequent renewal. The texts describe a generation that would be simultaneously the most informed and most deceived in human history. People would have access to more information than any previous generation, yet would be unable to distinguish truth from falsehood. They would possess unprecedented technological capabilities, yet would feel increasingly powerless to solve fundamental human problems. This description perfectly characterizes our current information age, where despite having access to vast databases of human knowledge, societies seem increasingly confused about basic moral principles and fundamental facts. The prophetic prediction of increased knowledge coupled with decreased wisdom has been fulfilled with disturbing accuracy in our digital era. The psychological precision extends to descriptions of how different personality types would respond to the spiritual and social chaos of the final generation. The texts describe some people as becoming increasingly fearful and anxious, others as becoming more hardened and rebellious, still others as experiencing spiritual awakening and supernatural peace despite external circumstances. Contemporary psychological studies validate these ancient predictions with remarkable accuracy. Anxiety disorders, depression, and existential despair have reached epidemic proportions in developed nations. Simultaneously, violent crime and social rebelliousness have increased dramatically. Yet, growing numbers of individuals report experiencing spiritual awakening and supernatural peace that transcends their circumstances. The prophetic texts explain these psychological phenomena as natural responses to living in a period when spiritual realities are breaking through into material consciousness. They describe this breakthrough as initially traumatic for those who have based their worldview on purely material assumptions, but ultimately liberating for those who embrace spiritual truth. This explanation provides a framework for understanding contemporary psychological and social phenomena that transcends conventional therapeutic and sociological approaches. The increasing rates of mental illness, addiction, and social dysfunction in materially prosperous societies make sense when understood as consequences of spiritual disconnection rather than purely psychological or social problems. The ancient prophecies suggest that these psychological and social problems will intensify until divine intervention establishes conditions that allow human consciousness to function according to its originally intended spiritual parameters. They describe this restoration as healing, not just individual psychological problems, but the fundamental spiritual disconnection that underlies all forms of human dysfunction. But here's what makes these psychological prophecies truly remarkable. They don't just describe problems, but provide specific guidance for individuals living during periods of civilizational transition. The texts contain detailed instructions for maintaining psychological and spiritual stability during times of external chaos and uncertainty. These instructions demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human psychology that anticipates discoveries in neuroscience, cognitive therapy, and spiritual counseling by thousands of years. The ancient texts describe meditation practices, community support systems, and cognitive frameworks that modern psychology has found to be highly effective for maintaining mental health during stressful periods. The precision of this psychological guidance suggests that the same intelligence that accurately predicted historical events also possessed comprehensive knowledge of human consciousness and the conditions necessary for psychological well-being. The ancient texts function not just as historical prophecy, but as practical psychology for people living during prophetically significant periods. This dual function of prophecy as both historical prediction and practical guidance explains why these ancient texts have remained relevant and influential throughout human history. They provide frameworks for understanding both external events and internal experiences that transcend cultural and temporal limitations. The investigation reveals that biblical prophecy represents far more than religious doctrine or historical documentation. We're examining a comprehensive system of knowledge that encompasses psychology, sociology, political science, and consciousness studies in addition to historical prediction. The accuracy of this system continues to be validated through contemporary developments that unfold exactly as ancient texts declared they would. The evidence speaks for itself. We've journeyed through thousands of years of fulfilled prophecies, examined predictions that named rulers before their birth, witnessed the mathematical impossibility of coincidence, and confronted accuracy that defies every rational explanation. From Cyrus conquering Babylon exactly as foretold, to Israel's miraculous restoration, to technological developments described millennia before they existed, we're looking at proof that transcends skepticism and belief alike. The question isn't whether these prophecies came true, it's what their precision tells us about the nature of time, knowledge, and the forces shaping human destiny. The same texts that accurately predicted our current era contain detailed descriptions of what's still to come. Are you ready to discover what they reveal about tomorrow?